Riverbend was the kind of village where every face was familiar and every footfall on the wooden pier sounded like a belonging. Nestled in a wide bend of the silver-blue Cascade River, it was cradled by gently rolling hills and bordered by stands of weeping willows whose long branches brushed the water's surface. Mornings began with fishermen pushing off in slender skiffs, nets coiled at their sides, and evenings closed with lantern light dancing on old clapboard houses. At the heart of it all lived Emma Hawke, a schoolteacher whose love for the river matched the devotion of her border collie, Finn, whose sable coat and bright, curious eyes made him both companion and guardian of their tranquil home. On the morning of April 15th, Emma and Finn set out on their usual pre-dawn walk along the riverbank. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh pine, and their boots sank softly into the saturated soil. Finn padded ahead, nose low to the ground, investigating each stick and scent mark with practiced diligence. Emma smiled at his eager tail wags. He embodied the village's quiet certainty that all was right in the world. But this dawn felt different. Dark gray ribbons of cloud, thicker than any spring shower ought to be, streaked the sky. A low wind murmured through the willows, carrying whispers of moisture and something heavier, an undercurrent of change. Finn paused at the water's edge, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the distant hills. His body stiffened as though he sensed not a storm but something far more urgent. Emma followed his gaze upriver, where the cascade's usual gentle curves had begun to swell with extra volume. "Slow rise," she murmured, recalling the spring runoff charts she kept in her cabin. Unusual for mid-April. She bent to cup a handful of water. It felt warmer, almost syrupy against her palms, an ominous sign that the mountain snows were melting too fast, fueled by unseasonable warmth. Finn whined softly, pressing his head into her thigh as if to say, "We should warn them." By mid-morning, as the sun struggled to break through the clouds, Emma cycled into the village square. Farmers gathered around the old stone well, their faces drawn with concern. Downstream, the wooden walkways lining the riverbank sagged under the weight of rising water. Children, normally free to dart between shop fronts and fruit stalls, stood hushed in clusters, watching the river seethe. The mayor, a burly man named Douglas Crane, paced in front of the general store, poring over the latest rainfall reports. Emma dismounted her bicycle and tucked Finn's leash firmly in her hand. "Mayor Crane," she called, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. "I've seen the headwaters swell. We could be in for more than another spring high water." Finn tugged at his leash, straining to move closer to the river's edge. Crane glanced at the darkening sky, then at Emma's determined gaze. "We've been lucky these last few decades," he said, frowning. "But the forecasts, they're warning of heavy storms upstream." He turned to a cluster of villagers. "Emma's right. We need to prepare for flooding. Sandbags, temporary barriers, start moving livestock to higher ground." All around them, the village sprang into motion. Men and women hurried to the barn to round up sheep and goats. Fletcher, the hardware store owner, loaded wheelbarrows with sandbags and flood pipes. Children helped carry lanterns and blankets toward the old schoolhouse on the hill, designated as the emergency shelter. And through it all, Finn ran ahead and back, guiding Emma to every corner, the low-lying mill, the riverside cabins, the hidden culverts where water could spill unchecked. By evening, the first lashing raindrops struck the windows of Emma's cottage, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Finn sat at the door, tail thumping anxiously on the plank floor, as Emma prepared hot tea and set out flashlights. Outside, the river roared louder, fed by tributaries now turned torrents. Through the gathering storm, Emma traced the patterns of the swollen water, her heart heavy but resolute. Tomorrow, she knew, would be the true test of Riverbend's spirit and of the bond between a loyal dog and the community he had already begun to say. That Emma awoke before dawn to the insistent drumming of rain on her roof, a sound she'd first dismissed as a heavy spring shower, but that now carried the weight of ominous urgency. Through the window, she could just make out the swollen river, its surface roiling in the flicker of lightning. Finn, curled at the foot of her bed, lifted his head and let out a low, insistent whine. His ears were pricked, his body tensed. By the time Emma pulled on her muck boots and raincoat, the river had already burst its banks. Water sluiced down the narrow lanes of Riverbend in brown, churning torrents. Wooden walkways buckled under its pressure, and the low-lying fields were transformed into marshes, islands of debris bobbing in the current. Chickens clucked in panicked desperation atop half-submerged coops, and bleating goats clustered on the hillside above the village green. With Finn at her side, Emma sprinted toward the community center, the church hall on the hill, where a hastily assembled volunteer team was erecting barriers. Villagers worked shoulder to shoulder, passing sandbags hand to hand, their faces set in grim determination. Emma grabbed a stack of heavy burlap sacks and began filling them with shifting sand, her movements efficient though her heart pounded with dread. Suddenly, a terrified scream cut through the roar of the flood. Emma froze, sandbag halfway to her shoulder. Finn bolted from her grip, ears flattened, fur plastered with rain. Instinct propelled Emma forward as she chased the dog down a side alley now turned river. The water swirled up to Finn's belly, racing past him in rippling eddies. He wedged himself against a submerged fence post and barked urgently, nose pointed toward a dark window half underwater. Emma waded in, water sloshing through her rain pants. "Finn, what is it?" she called, peering into the murky depths. Finn plunged ahead without hesitation, scrambling up onto the porch of a half-submerged cottage. There, clinging to a tilted windowsill, was a small girl, soaked to the bone, fists clenched on the warped wood, eyes wide with terror. "Hold on!" Emma shouted, lifting her voice above the water's rush. She took off her raincoat and extended it like a lifeline. Finn pressed close to the girl's side, nuzzling her arm in reassurance. With a swift heave, Emma hauled the child onto the porch, draping her in thick fabric. The girl trembled but did not cry, her small face pressed into Finn's wet fur. As Emma guided them back through the flooded alley, Finn leading the way, alert to every hidden hole and submerged obstacle, the first light of dawn painted the storm clouds in weary gray. Neighbors who had spotted the rescue waded out to help, forming a human chain to escort mother and daughter to higher ground. By sunrise, the village center was awash in frantic activity, families huddled in the church hall, livestock bleated from makeshift pens, and the air crackled with the mix of fear and relief that comes when a community pulls together. Emma wrapped the rescued girl in dry blankets while Finn, his coat matted but tail wagging, received pats and praises from every grateful hand. In that turbulent morning, as water continued to pour from the hills, Emma realized that Riverbend's true defense lay not in sandbags or barriers alone, but in the unwavering courage of neighbors and in the boundless loyalty of one brave dog who had heard a cry where others heard only the storm. By late morning, the rain had eased to a steady sheet, but the damage was already done. Riverbend lay half submerged, its cobblestone streets transformed into winding canals, and rooftops now served as islands amid a churning sea of brown water. Emma adjusted the straps of her soaked backpack, packed with emergency blankets, drinking water, and medical kits, and cast a determined look at Finn. His dark eyes shone with purpose, and with a jubilant bark, he leapt forward into the knee-high flood. "All right, Finn," Emma called, lifting her voice above the roar of rushing current. "Show me where the need is greatest." The border collie darted ahead, nose skimming the water's surface as he threaded around submerged vehicles and fence posts. Twice he paused, staring intently at seemingly calm pools, then slapped his muzzle against the water's edge to warn Emma of hidden drop-offs or dangerous debris concealed beneath the murk. Their first task was to deliver fresh water and dry blankets to the elderly residents trapped on North Street. The narrow wooden footbridge had collapsed under the pressure of the torrent, cutting off access to Mrs. Alvarez's cottage. Finn led Emma to a shallow channel only he could detect, where loose boards and protruding nails lay safely submerged. Carefully, Emma waded across, holding the pack aloft, as Finn guided her paw-step by paw-step to solid ground. Inside, the 92-year-old Mrs. Alvarez sat shivering on her sofa, wrapped in a single wool shawl. "Oh, Finn," the frail woman croaked with a grateful smile. "You've come for me." Emma knelt to soothe her, setting down the warm supplies before guiding her gently outside. Finn nudged the old woman's elbow, prompting her to lean on Emma's arm, then he took the lead once more, barking encouragement as they navigated back to higher ground. Next, Emma and Finn turned toward the livestock pens, where anxious farmers pleaded for help. Cows and sheep clustered on makeshift rafts of hay bales, frightened and cold. Emma coordinated with a group of volunteers to tow the animals to dry fields upstream. Finn swam alongside, barking directions when strong currents threatened to sweep the rafts off course. His steadfast presence calmed panicked animals and inspired the rescue team to persevere despite exhaustion. As midday light broke through ragged clouds, Emma paused on a flooded lane, her soaked sleeves chafing against her arms, and watched Finn scout ahead toward a half-submerged barn. She knew they still had miles to go, medical supplies to deliver, more villagers to evacuate, and critical channels to shore up before the river crested again. Yet as Finn bounded back, tail high and eyes bright with that familiar spark, Emma felt renewed strength. In his unwavering determination and keen instincts, she saw not just a dog, but a hero whose loyalty gave Riverbend its greatest hope amid the floods, proof that courage in the face of desperation could flow as inexorably as the water that threatened to consume them all. By late afternoon, the floodwaters had risen to their fullest fury. The Cascade River, once a meandering ribbon of silver, now thundered against the century-old mill dam with relentless force. Water sluiced over the crumbling masonry in a foaming wall, threatening to breach the sluice gates at any moment and unleash a catastrophic surge on lower Riverbend. Emma stood at the crest of the dam's weathered parapet, rain plastering her hair to her forehead and drenching her clothes, while Finn paced at her side, muscles coiled, tail lashing the air in tense anticipation. The dam's iron sluice gates, last repaired decades ago, creaked under the strain, and deep cracks spiderwebbed through the mortar between ancient stones. A team of volunteer engineers and farmers crouched below, passing sandbags hand to hand, their hands raw and trembling from cold and fatigue. Two terrified children, clutching blankets, huddled against Emma's coat. Emma raised her voice to be heard above the roar. "We must shore up that eastern buttress," she shouted. "Finn, show me where the leaks are worst." At her command, Finn darted across the narrow walkway, nose low to the ground. He paused at a seepage point where water oozed from a fissure in the dam's base, then barked sharply. Emma sprinted over and found a length of cable, part of a broken guide rail, floating free in the swirling current. With teeth clenched against the cold, Finn dangled one end of the cable into the water's eddies, preventing it from being swept away. Emma gripped the other end, looping it through a nearby anchor bolt that miraculously held fast. With the makeshift line in place, volunteers heaved sandbags along the cable, piling them like armor against the mortar. The water battered the new barrier, foam spraying over their shoulders, but pooled briefly behind the dam's east flank rather than bursting through. Each sandbag placed was a small victory, a testament to human will reinforced by a dog's unfaltering guidance. Suddenly, a thunderous crack echoed as part of the dam's northern wing gave way, sending a roaring cascade toward the village below. Emma's heart seized. She saw the wall of water bearing down on the community center and the shelter where families had taken refuge. Instinct overcame fatigue. She grabbed Finn's collar and raced down the embankment, shouting orders to redirect a line of small boats loaded with the most vulnerable evacuees. Finn bounded ahead, darting between overturned rowboats, barking to guide rescuers away from submerged pilings and toward safer channels. Within minutes, the breach was contained by the reinforced barrier at the dam. The makeshift cable-anchored line held, diverting the worst of the overflow back into the river's main channel. The tide of water split its course, sparing the lower town from annihilation by mere inches. Men and women collapsed against one another, exultant cries mingling with tears of relief, as the two siblings Emma had sheltered reached the shore unharmed. Emma knelt in the muddy shallows, wrapping the children in dry coats as Finn shook himself free of rain, droplets flying like silver sparks. The dam still groaned, but the worst had passed. Standing amid the exhausted but triumphant villagers, Emma realized that it was not stone or steel that had saved Riverbend, it was the torrent of loyalty flowing from a dog's brave heart and the unwavering resolve of a community united in hope. As dawn's first pale light filtered through ragged clouds, Riverbend awoke to a world transformed. The furious torrents that had swallowed roads and fields the night before now receded into slow, silty streams threading through the village. Emma stepped onto the cracked cobblestones outside the old mill, Finn trotting loyally at her heel, his coat matted but tail wagging with hopeful energy. Around them, neighbors emerged from makeshift shelters, blinking against the soft glow of morning and inhaling the fragrant promise of renewal. Together, Emma and Finn began the day's work. Under her direction, teams of volunteers formed lines along the riverbank, passing buckets of debris, branches, mud, and twisted fencing from hand to hand, returning the waterway to its rightful channel. Finn bounded between groups, gently herding a stray sheep back into a corral and alerting Emma to a blocked drain beneath a fallen beam. At Emma's nod, two young fishermen waded in to clear the obstruction, unleashing a rush of trapped water that rippled downstream like a sigh of relief. By mid-morning, the village green, once submerged beneath several feet of water, had re-emerged. Children, bundled in dry coats, chased each other through puddles, squealing with delight at the new adventure. Elderly townsfolk watched from sturdy benches, offering nods of encouragement to Emma and Finn as they passed by. The spirit of Riverbend, tested by flood and fear, now glowed with a shared determination to rebuild. Even the battered facades of riverside shops looked more like battle scars to be honored than wounds to be lamented. At the heart of the village stood the old stone church, its doors flung wide to shelter families gathering for the midday assembly. Emma climbed onto the raised platform beside Mayor Crane, who held a thermos of strong coffee in one hand and Finn's leash in the other. The murmur of voices hushed as Emma addressed the crowd, her voice steady but rich with emotion. She spoke of the night's terrors, the relentless rain, the collapsing dam, the desperate rescues, but also of the unwavering courage she had witnessed. "It was Finn who led me to the trapped child," she said, her hand resting on her dog's head. "And it was every one of you farmers, shopkeepers, students, who answered the call to help. Tonight, we faced the flood as strangers, this morning, we stand together as a family." Finn sat attentively at her side, head cocked, ears soft, as children came forward to pet him. Their small hands stroked his fur, and he rewarded them with gentle nudges and happy licks, embodying the loyalty that had become Riverbend's surest refuge. Mayor Crane raised his coffee in a silent salute before lifting his voice in thanks to Emma and Finn and every soul who had labored through wind, water, and darkness. In the days that followed, reconstruction unfolded like a rising tide of hope. Bridges were rebuilt, barns restocked, and the mill dam, fortified by newly poured concrete and reinforced sluice gates, stood stronger than ever. Through it all, Emma and Finn remained at the forefront, laying stones along the riverbank, distributing food and blankets, and guiding children through the restored fields to inspect the first shoots of spring wheat. On the first clear evening after the flood, the village gathered once more beneath lantern light in the reopened town square. A long table groaned with a communal feast, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, fish caught from the returning river, while musicians coaxed familiar folk tunes from fiddles and accordions. Emma raised a glass of cider, and Finn, sensing the moment's solemn joy, lifted his head and gave a soft, triumphant bark. The toast that followed was not just to survival, but to the bonds of compassion and loyalty that had carried Riverbend from devastation to renewal. As the stars emerged overhead, mirrored in the river's now quiet surface, Emma reflected on how a single dog's instinct had awakened an entire village's courage. In that gentle hush, broken only by the ripple of water and the hum of reunited laughter, Riverbend found its heart beating strong once more, forever bound by the torrent of loyalty that had saved them all.